Hi everyone, welcome to the Robertson Media Center at the University of Virginia. Today we're going to provide a basic introduction to Audacity. It's a free and easy to use multi-track audio editor and recorder. This video series is intended for beginners and only covers enough to get started. So for more details, check out Audacity's tutorials at the link below. We'll start with a tour of the interface, then we'll cover how to import audio. And then next we'll look at the basic editing techniques and tools, how to record with an external microphone, and then how to export a file to turn in. Audacity is open source, which means it was developed by an online community with the intent to distribute it for free. This has its positives and negatives, which we'll explore as we move through the videos. You can use it on a Mac, Windows, and Linux, and I recommend you download it on your own computer so you don't need to return to the G-Lab. If you need help installing the program, we provided a link below with step-by-step instructions. And here is Audacity, as you can see here. First, notice the menu bar. We've got Audacity, File, Edit, Select, View, Transport, Tracks, Generate, Effect, Analyze, Tools, Window, and Help. Windows excludes the Audacity menu pull-down and also the Window pull-down here. On top of the window itself, you can see we have three buttons over here. We have Close, Minimize, or Hide the window, and Full Screen. On Windows, they're the same. They're just over here and in a slightly different order. I tend to avoid full screening this software and also any other open source software that I tend to use because it becomes rather unstable and kind of glitchy. It's also easier to access your other windows. For instance, here it's easier to drag and drop to import, like so. I'll undo that. And access all your files over in the Finder window or in Windows Explorer. I also have a Word doc open here, or a Google Doc. And that way I can access anything that I need to reference over here. I always encourage users to have multiple reference windows for a better workflow. So below these, we have some other buttons to notice in this little panel here. We have pause, play, stop, skip to beginning, and skip to end, along with record. When you are editing, you cannot make changes while in pause. So we recommend that you hit stop after previewing your project, which is over here. You'll notice that if it is paused, this will be highlighted, and you'll also have it down here in the status bar as paused. I'll give you an example. So paused. These are somewhat self-explanatory, right? Play moves through your project through time. Stop means that you stop entirely. Skip to beginning if you're kind of far along in the project. You want to go back to the beginning. Skip to the end if you want to skip to the end. If you have a super long project, these can be useful. All right, next we have the record button. You can see it pops up here with R, although we recommend recording to a new track. You can add a new track by go to Tracks, Add New. I'm going to add a mono track. And here I can record directly on it. If you have nothing here, it's also okay. You can hit record and you can see that it's going to record directly onto a new track. However, if you, for instance, have it selected here and you start recording, you'll see it's going to record directly after. So we recommend recording something onto a new track, which is the second one here under, as I hover, record new track, which is Shift R. So if I type in select a place, for instance here, and I say Shift R, and you can see that it's going to record a new track directly underneath, directly onto a new track. See, it's going to record directly after. Stop. Okay, and next to these, you have these 6 primary tools. In this video series, we're only going to use 3 of them: the selection tool, the envelope tool, and the time shift tool. The zoom tool, the draw tool, and the multi-tool are not really that useful if you follow the method that we use in this video. So just focus on those 3. Next, we have the audio levels. You can see they have a little symbol here. We have the microphone and a speaker. If I were to click here, you can see I start monitoring from the microphone itself. And that's up here actually as the input recording levels. Over here is the playback recording levels. So if I were to hit play, then you can see that it's going to record a new. You can see that they show up over on the right side there. So this is two different sets of levels. Below that, you'll see there's those same symbols. You have the speaker and the microphone. This is going to be your volume for recording. So if this, I'll click the monitor again. I wanted it to be louder. You could see I could turn that up, or I could turn it way down if I wanted it to be a lot softer. So this is your input recording level. This over here is the speaker, the playback volume. So if you want it to be louder coming out of your headphones or your speakers, you can turn up the playback volume there. Over here, it should look pretty familiar. You have cut, copy, and paste. You have command, or on a PC, control X, command C, command V. Those you'll be using quite often in this workspace. Then we have two more, slightly more complicated buttons right here next to paste. So this one is the trim outside button. So if I make a selection, you can see it pops up and I'm allowed to do it. Trim audio outside selection. And this one is the inverse, which is silence, which is basically trim inside the selection. Trim outside will only keep the selected portion of the audio on a track. So whatever you have selected, it will keep, and everything else it'll get rid of. The silence, which we'll actually use a lot in this tutorial series, is a lot more useful. It essentially trims what's inside and leaves the space there. So if I hit this, you can see it gets rid of that thing, but doesn't actually remove the space. I'm going to Command Z, I'm going to undo that. We'll cover that more in the next video. Right here we have undo and redo. If you make a mistake, undo here is Command, or on a PC, Control Z. And then you have an array of zoom controls. We'll only use a couple of these very often. The most useful, of course, is plus and minus, zoom in, zoom out. And then next to that, don't change this. This is the playback speed. Unless you have a really good reason, leave that at 1x. Below this, you'll find the inputs and outputs. You can see we can leave that on core audio. This one, same symbol over here, is the microphone. I have the Yeti stereo microphone selected because that's a little bit better than the one on my laptop, but you could switch back and forth if you'd like. Here you can choose between mono and stereo if you have those options with your microphone. I do, but I'm recording in mono. And then here you can see the same symbol over here that you've seen a couple of times. And this is your playback device, the output. In this situation, the output here is to my recording device, so it can hear all the things that are played back. But in your case, it's probably going to be external headphones or whatever speakers you're using for your device. We'll talk about recording with a microphone in more detail in a later video. Okay, now let's talk about the timeline. That's this portion here. Up here, you can see that this top bar is numbered in seconds from the beginning, which is 0. And so if I were to move my selector over to 5 and select here, right, I am about 5 seconds into my project from the beginning. So you can see that the numbers go up in the number of seconds in your project. I'm not quite actually at 5. If you look down here in audio position, you can see I'm at 5.39 seconds, 0.39 seconds. And so you can watch as I hit play. Hit the play button. You can see that it's going to record a new track and stop. You can see that down there the audio position changed as it was playing. So you can see the exact location of your selector. So instead of the play button, I could hit the space bar. Space bar is another way to start playing your audio. So again, if you watch down over here in the audio position, hit play with the space bar, you can see that it's going to record a new track directly. Hit the space bar again is to stop, not pause. Another way to play is if you hover over on the top of this timeline, you can see this little green triangle. If I hover, it says the quick play enabled, which means that wherever I click, it'll start playing from there. You can see that it's going to record a new. So I'll hit stop, and I'm going to click again at 6 seconds. Record a new track directly onto a new. And there you can see you could play very specifically, or you can click and either press play or press the space bar. On the far left over here, you can see that I have an audio track. I actually have 2 audio tracks, and you can have as many as you want. And in most cases, you're going to use quite a few. Very rarely will you do an entire project on a single track. You can see that they're playing at the same time. So if I were to select here and press play, you can see that it's going to record a new track directly under. They're both playing simultaneously, so you don't hear them as separate tracks. We're just keeping them separate so we can kind of organize and see the individual parts, which we can mix together later. When you export, it'll all be one thing. If you'd like to add a track, you go to Tracks, Add New, and then you can select either a mono or a stereo track. In this case, you can see over here that I am recording in mono, so I will select a mono track. We'll talk about the difference between mono and stereo a little bit later. So back up to the top, you can see this is my kind of options over on the audio track. Mute right here will silence the whole track. If you don't want to hear it, you can kind of keep it silent. The inverse is solo. It means it's going to silence everything else, all the other tracks except for this one, which can be really useful if you just want to hear this one part of something that already has a lot going on, and maybe hear maybe what's going wrong with it there on solo. You can see they gray out when they are muted. See how solo, mute, mute. If I unclick it, they all uncheck. The X in the corner will close and delete everything on that audio track. So I'll do it down on this one. Be careful you don't have something you want on there because it will be lost. And it may be better to actually mute it. So if I don't know if I want anything on here, I can mute it, and then I can just kind of minimize it, and then it can just go away for a while. And I can decide later if it's something I want to keep. This drop-down menu has many options here. You can see including change between mono and stereo, or you can move a track up or down in the stack. So if I click move track to bottom, you can see it moved it down to the bottom of the stack, and I will move it back to the top. Note you can name the tracks. This is really useful if you start having a lot of audio tracks, and then you can name them based on something in the content, like talking about audio tracks or voice recording part 2. The plus and minus buttons here will set the gain or the volume of the whole track up or down. So you can see if I slit this way, it's going to go up and down in decibels. Louder or quieter. L and R are simply for the left and right speakers in a stereo mix. We'll get into that a little bit later, but that's called panning. And that way you can make a whole track sound like it's coming from a particular direction, to the left or to the right. The select button selects the entire track for you, so you don't have to, zoom all the way out and try to select it all with the selection tool. And the bottom arrow minimizes the track, which kind of makes it small and go away when not in use, so that the other tracks are easier to see. So open back up. And then down here on the bottom bar, you can see there's a few things down here. Most of the defaults should be fine on this project rate. It's the sample rate of your project. 44.1 kilohertz should be good for most projects. That's the default. However, if you're an advanced user and you want to make something with a slightly more professional sampling rate, I wouldn't recommend going over 48,000. But I'm going to return this to 44.1K. Leave the snapping off. If you want to see where you are in a particular project, you can see here's the audio position. It says 8.336 seconds, and that's where I'm located here. Right next to that, here is the start and end of a selection. So if I make a selection, it's a similar thing to the audio position. You can see it starts at 5.84 and ends at 7.79 here in this selection. And finally, there's a status bar down at the bottom. You can see it says stopped. If it were paused, it would say pause, play, recording. This is just telling you what's going on. All right, so I'm going to minimize these two so they're out of the way and start importing. So the easiest way to import audio is to drag and drop from the Finder or from the Explorer on Windows. So I'm going to drag and drop Spooky Number 1 in here. You can see it just shows up on its own track automatically. And then I can move things around using the time shift tool, which we'll talk about when we get to editing. But again, if you want things to move back and forth, move it around, maybe place it at the same start point that this one has, then you can do that with the time shift tool. You can also import file, import audio, and say open. Audacity, again, automatically imports files onto a new track. And you can see it names it the file that you imported. Now I want you to notice what this imported file looks like. This shape is called a waveform. Essentially, a waveform is a graph of loudness over time. The unique shape allows you to see when sounds are happening, when they begin and when they end. This is super helpful because you don't have to listen to know when something is happening. You can just see it. For example, if you recorded an interview, say this was an interview, you know when the pauses are because the waveform is flat. So you can see nothing said here, then words, 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 and then there's a pause here between. This is where you can make cuts. So if I make a selection, I could cut that by pressing delete. I'm going to undo that. So this is what my voice looks like. You may also notice that each track can have either one or two waveforms. So if I open this one back up here, you can see this one has one and this one has two. What's the deal with that? This is the difference between a mono and a stereo track. As you can see, it's listed over here on the left side. See, this one has stereo, this one's mono. It does have to be expanded far enough, so I click this and then I can see this one's mono as well. Stereo simply means a separate right and left speaker, which mimics traditional human hearing. That is, having two ears allows us to locate where sounds are coming from based on when the sound waves hit the left and right ear. For instance, if the sound hits the right ear first and then the left, we know it's probably coming from the right. So that's how we kind of locate sounds. So you would record two inputs for a single stereo track, one for the right speaker and one for the left speaker. Mono tracks only record a single input and thus equal for both speakers on playback. So it doesn't mean that it only plays out of one speaker. It'll actually play out of both equally, unless you, of course, change the panning. This actually matters immensely because you need to select what kind of track to create. Also, some microphones allow you to record in stereo or mono, like this one. And also, any audio you import could be mono or stereo, depending on how they were recorded. So you can see the thing I imported was in stereo. What I recorded is actually in mono. Okay, so let's take a moment here to discuss how to navigate in this interface. During editing, you'll absolutely want to zoom in and out. You'll want to see small details at sometimes, and then other times you're going to want to zoom out and see all the different pieces and how they're working together. So you have to zoom in and out. And in order to do this, it's really best to learn some keyboard shortcuts. It's going to save you a lot of time and effort. But to zoom in, you hit the zoom in button over here, or you can press Command or Control on a PC 1. To zoom out, you can press the zoom out button above the timeline, or it's Command or Control 3. To view the whole length of the project, you can select the Fit to Project Width button, which is right here, or you can do Command or Control F. If you want to zoom to a custom width, you need to make a selection, and then you can use this button, which is Fit Selection to Width, or Command and Control E. And then it zooms into that particular selection. I know what you're thinking. What about the zoom tool in the toolbar? That looks cool. I don't recommend you use it because these tools are actually going to be much easier to use in combination, especially with the keyboard shortcuts. So I'm not even going to go there. Don't worry about the zoom tool in the toolbar. Now, so far, these have all been horizontal zooming in the timeline, which I mean along this axis here. What if you want to zoom this way, right? If you have a bunch of tracks here and you want to see them all at once, well, you have a few options. You can do the most direct one, but it's time consuming. You can resize each track. So you can grab the bottom here, you can move it up or down, and then you have to do that on all of them and get them all the right size. Or you can minimize tracks. You could say, oh, I don't want to deal with this one or this one right now, and then I can just really focus on this track here. I think the best one for me is fit to height. So if you maximize all these windows here, maybe make them a little bit bigger to dramatize it. So if you go to View, Track Size, and hit Fit to Height, which is Shift, Control, or Command F, watch what happens. Oh, wow. So they're all aligned specifically to fit into that window. So if you have a bunch of tracks, you can get them to all fit in one window. Just save you some time. It's very handy to know the shortcut. Again, Command-Shift-F or Control-Shift-F. Great. Well, that's a good start. We're going to pause for a moment and come back in the next video talking about basic editing.